Sticking no, you didn't.
You've got a lot of telly to do.
Lots of what?
Telly to do on the BBC.
I haven't seen the show yet. Alex Patterson said, would he already sent me the show? And I said, yes, but I've seen it.
Impact surgery. Oh, that's right.
And then coming back.
That's right.
I can get you in on this one, but I can't get you in on the other one if you want to come in on the last. On the really stuff. I'll have to do that at the end. Right, welcome. Thank you for coming and agreeing to come this afternoon. And normally we have 2 or 3 people, but we thought you were so brilliant that you could do it all on your own. So what we really want you to talk about, we're looking at the organisation and CMEC as it emerges. And this is an opportunity you, on the front line, working with a lot of lone parents who presumably try and extract a bit of money out of this organisation, for you to have a view on the value that the organisation gives to date, and then some feel of where value for money, and that's where we're coming from, would emerge or not out of the future policy and the way in which it then operates. Yes. So it's really over to you to say whatever you like. Nobody's trying to catch you out, and you really just want to hear from your experience and expertise.
Okay, well, perhaps just to start off by telling you a little bit about Gingerbread, that we run a helpline for single parents that deals with over 1,200 queries a month, and we give information and advice to single parents in fact sheets and online. And we have get a lot of feedback from single parents about child maintenance and about the child maintenance system, but also about how important child maintenance is to them. Single parents continue to be disadvantaged by poverty, and almost half of all children in single parents are being brought up in poverty. That includes parents in work, where 19% of working single parents are still in poverty if they're working full-time, and 25% of working single parents working part-time. And life can be a struggle, and maintenance...
You ought to define poverty in that context.
Which definition of poverty?
I'm using the
60%
of HBAI figure. Life can be a struggle, and maintenance makes it easier at a time when actually life is getting harder due to tax and benefit cuts, which the Institute for Fiscal Studies estimates that by 2014 will lead to lone mothers being 8.5% of their income worse off, and lone fathers 7.5% worse off. So in that context, child maintenance really matters. It's spent on things like food, clothes, school expenses, shoes. One of the reasons why children in single-parent families are poor is because there's only one income coming in, and getting that regular money from the other parent really matters. And I want to also just highlight why the statutory system matters, because although, and we agree with the government, it's good if more parents could agree their own arrangements. The government's very keen to encourage that. There will always be cases where it's very difficult to do that. And it was Mrs. Thatcher who set up the CSA because at that time it was felt that too many non-resident parents were walking away from their children when relationships broke down and weren't paying it. And in her words, relationships can end, but your responsibilities to your children continue. And although you can't make irresponsible parents behave responsibly, you can make them pay for their children's everyday living expenses. That's the purpose of the CSA, and it's now needed more than ever. It helps at the moment. Over 880,000 children are reliant on payments from the Statutory Maintenance Service, and last year it got £1.1 billion in maintenance for children. Now, those are not trivial amounts of money, and they really matter. And the parents who turn to the CSA tend to be the ones who turn to it because they've got no alternative. They're more conflicted. All the evidence shows they're more conflicted. They usually have been separated for some time. They've maybe tried a private voluntary arrangement that has broken down. They tend to be older. All the evidence shows that you start off amicably, then circumstances change. People repartner, they have other babies, gets more difficult. But of course, those original children still need maintaining day in, day out, and that's what the CSA does. It gets regular money week after week, year after year. It's also poorer parents tend to use the statutory service because it's easier to make...
You've got statistics on that because they're not in the report. I don't know if you've got them.
Yes.
I wondered how many of the people who actually use the service are sort of, I don't know, on benefits or some definition like that.
Yes, I can give you some figures. There's a very big study that was done by the DWP, relationship breakdown study, which was a big quantitative survey, it was a representative sample. And that showed that just looking at amicable relationships between parents as being one of the grounds for private arrangements, 46% of parents who were on friendly terms with their ex had a private arrangement, compared to just under a fifth where it wasn't at all friendly. The parents who use the CSA, they are you're twice as likely to have a voluntary arrangement if your income is over £10,000 than if it's below.
Twice as likely. Okay.
If you look at the figures overall, which are in the NAO report, you can see that nearly half of all eligible families use the CSA. I think it's 1.2 million cases are within the CSA out of a sort of total eligible group of 2.5 million families. It's a very important part of getting maintenance to children.
Okay, and the changes? Well, do two things. One, the efficiencies of the current system. How you think you do or you don't get value for money out of the current system, and then your view of how the changes will make it a more effective system and better value for money.
The service, the report is absolutely right that the service that the CSA, the statutory system, provides has improved over the last few years. There was a 3-year operational improvement programme between 2006 and 2009, and there is more money going to children now than ever before. Backlogs are being reduced, and the service is faster, and a higher proportion of non-resident parents are paying something. But there are problems. I'd point to the collection of arrears. There's partly a debt legacy, really, from past years of failure, but we think they could still be being more energetic to collect savings. A report from the NAO, the client account report, showed there's about £1 billion of collectible arrears. Last year, the CSA collected 121 million. And we think it could make more energetic use of the massive armoury of collection powers it has at its disposal. I think the other thing is, other points are there's a lot of nil assessed cases. There's 200,000 nil assessed cases, and that's because they've never been revisited. That's one of the things that the new system is hopefully going to do. At the moment, there's no obligation on a non-resident parent to report when his income goes up. And a lot of cases have just stayed very, very flat. Perhaps the assessment was done when someone was unemployed quite a long time ago, and it's never been revisited. One of the things that drives parents with care mad and causes immense kind of frustration is the lack of responsiveness of the agency, that the money, your maintenance suddenly goes down or it stops, and you don't know why. There's no explanation. Is it because the non-resident parent has stopped paying? Is it because his circumstances have changed? Is it because the CSA have made a mistake and there's a problem at their end? You simply don't know, and it can be very, very hard to ring up, find the right person to talk to. People ring up and they ring again. Or they might discover that the non-resident parent isn't paying and they want to find out what the agency is doing about it. And that can be really hard because somehow the parent with care is seen as a bit of an interruption, a sort of irritant. And people get very frustrated at that simple problem of lack of contact, and that's particularly true in the case of this group of cases called clerical cases, which are ones where problems have gone wrong with the IT system and they're managed sort of offline in a completely different office, and it can be quite hard to communicate there.
And why are they? Well, we'll ask them. But I mean, have you got a view why they're clerical? Why have they? What's gone wrong? Well, they've been there forever. Those cases, haven't they?
That is part of the legacy that the CSA has to grapple with at the moment, and it's one of the reasons why, of course, they're proposing a new system. That's because the IT of the current system is still not good enough, and it's producing these things called stuck cases, which I think they've put in a sort of computer upgrade which has revealed the extent of these cases floating around there, and they're systematically transferring them over to another online sort of IT system to deal with. But they are quite expensive to deal with. They cost 3 times as much to process, I think I read from the Stephen Geraghty said at one point. So that's more costly. The sort of throw out of these cases from the normal online system are causing extra costs. And I think there's also a lack of transparency, particularly for single parents dealing with where their partner is self-employed. You get a figure for the calculation. You think, that's funny, it's only £10 a week. I know he earns a lot, you should be paying a lot more than that. And you can't find out what the income figure is. You have to appeal. That's the only way you can get a breakdown of the income figure. The treatment of self-employed, I think the CSA, for reasons of speed and processing, simply seems to accept the figure they're given by a non-resident parent, which in lots of cases may be right, but there's got to be a culture, I think, of perhaps a bit more questioning, particularly where the non-resident parent has the ability to control how income is presented. For instance, setting up a company, private company, is fantastically tax efficient, but it also has the effect of giving you perhaps a very small amount of earnings. You pay yourself an earning of just about the minimum wage and take your income in other forms. Now, the CSA will simply take the earnings figure. That is what the basic calculation is based on. Now, there are complicated procedures called variations and departures to try and challenge that, but they're very, very hard for single parents to deal with.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt you. I mean, we want to come back to the new system in your view, but Ian and Chris are both waiting to ask questions. So let me just ask Ian, go first.
I know we all have different constituencies. I think I can honestly say CSA cases are my biggest workload. Yeah. Had another load on Saturday. And just a couple of questions, and it's really about your view of the administration. We all talk about IT, but they're dumb machines. They're only as good as what you put into them. And literally on Saturday, a case of someone seeking an assessment in 2009, the result not being available till 2011. I mean, what is going on that something can take 2 years to actually take place? What would your do you know much about the administration?
The frustrating thing is it's a bit like a black box. You can see there's been a problem there, but trying to find out what it is and what went wrong, and this whole sort of analysis, it's incredibly frustrating for advisors, I think, for the parent themselves. That's why I think people complain to an MP, because people, you get replies back from the CSA which give more information perhaps than people can get themselves.
The thing I find it baffling, if we take up the same case twice, we get a different story the second time, which I just find stunning. It seems as though there's some sort of chaotic administration. People tell me that how you're even treated depends how old your case is. So somewhere behind the scenes there's 4 different approaches being taken, and then it just seems you can blame IT, but it seems as though there's some administrative sort of mess going on there.
Well, I think it's very frustrating for the staff who I think struggle with the fact that there was an initial system, the old system. They then introduced what was supposed to be the new system, which didn't work either, so they couldn't transfer all the old cases to that system. So they've got 2 separate systems in parallel. Then you've now got this third system because of IT problems. They're having to do cases offline. It's not surprising that it can be quite hard to work out what happens. And who knows, in some cases they could have been diligently trying to get hold of trace the non-resident parent who may be trying all sorts of ways of avoiding answering all the letters. You don't know. And the real frustrating thing is, unless you kind of make a strong complaint and complain again, when eventually you might get a full detailed explanation of all the dates and what went wrong, you just don't know.
Well, that's helpful. So it's not just me then.
It's all of us. Chris?
Definitely not just you. I was just wondering if you could say something about the complaints procedure now and how the new system might help or hinder it. Because I've got my own views about how the complaints procedure works, and it doesn't seem to work very well. And you need to have to come through us to complain to the CSA as MPs?
Originally, when the scheme set up, the poor old parliamentary ombudsman got so inundated by complaints about the CSA that they had to set up an independent complaints sort of adjudicator within the CSA, who's called the independent case examiner, and that's a sort of independent process. That takes quite a long time. I think last year the agency dealt with about 23,000 complaints. There are about 8,500 of those went through the MP. It's not a lot. And I think the problem is a lot of people have become very pessimistic and very sort of almost resigned that they give up. And the cases that you get are probably people who, the few people who make it to you. And it has to be said, MPs do make a difference because you write. There is a special unit that replies in a lot more detail, that fishes the case out, has a look at it, and does actually do something about it.
And the new system... MPs surely shouldn't be part of the infrastructure of making the system work. The whole point, surely, of the sort of pressure you get from MPs, constituency surgeries in any area of administration is when the policy is not working as it is supposed to, exactly. And the surgery is really just a way of, if you like, at least in theory, flagging up that there's a problem,
yes,
rather than being a central part of the ongoing mechanism for solving the problem.
And the independent, I think it's called the independent case examiner, ICE, does produce an annual report where he does try and highlight some of the sort of structural patterns of problems. But you're dealing, but in the sense that the whole grinding machinery is one of the things that the future scheme is trying to address. There are problems with it. Everyone knows that. We have really tried to stress in the new system what they have to do is put the customer at the centre. They have to make this far more user-friendly, far more transparent, so that people know what's happening on a case. So they get regular updates, they know what's happening, they can follow it, they can get answers. That would help enormously.
Can I ask you a bit about the new scheme that is proposed? From your work with the customers, what are you looking to that could make it work better? Have you any concerns about the way that the new proposals are being implemented?
I think for us, one of the most startling revelations about the report is we've been campaigning against the introduction of charging to use the future service. Under the future system, parents with care will face an upfront charge, which the government have moved on this. It's going to be £20 to get into the statutory system. Once an assessment is carried out, the non-resident parent will be offered the chance to pay for free if he makes what's called a maintenance direct arrangement. He pays direct to the parent with care. If that breaks down, and if the Commission is satisfied that the non-resident parent will not pay, the parent with care can be brought into the collection service, but she will then be charged between 7 and 12%, taken off every child maintenance payment. And the non-resident parent will be charged between 15 and 20% extra on every payment. And our objection is that where you have a system where the parent with care is only in that collection service because the other parent has refused to pay, won't pay, and the Commission is satisfied, it's proven they haven't paid, why take money away from children? This is money that actually, pays for shoes and clothes and food and bills. Why take that money away from the parent with care? Sometimes I drop into saying her. I should say that 97% of parents with care are women, and the same proportion are
now, can I just challenge you on that? Because it's not our job to say, that's a policy decision that the government has taken, whatever you've liked. And what we're trying to explore, really, is within the parameters of that policy decision, will it work?
Yes.
And is it an effective way of getting value for money, or would they, as the report suggests, have been better looking for trying to get greater efficiencies out of the way that they operate as an organisation? So it's, we're not here to sort of value judge.
No, absolutely not. And I
but
think
will it work within the parameters? Because the government are introducing this because they want more people to settle outside both DWP systems and the court. Will that happen? Won't it happen? What's your view from, and then what? And again, just focus on the value for money issues if you can.
Well, I think that one of the things that's very striking is the discrepancy between public statements by ministers about the justification for charging and the private calculations by officials. That the minister has said that making private arrangements, what they call a family-based arrangement, is something that parents should be able to do for themselves through an FBA, a family-based agreement, in the vast majority of cases. And yet, if you look at what the National Audit Office report shows, it shows that in terms of the current CSA caseload, only 15% are going to go for a family-based arrangement, whereas 71% of the existing caseload will opt for the statutory scheme. So in terms of where the vast majority of cases are going to end up, the minister's saying one thing, but the officials are saying quite another thing. In letters to us, the Minister has said that the cost of a typical case is £25,000 over the lifetime of a child using the CSA, and therefore it's fair to introduce charging. Whereas if you look at figure 7 on page 20 of the report, it shows that the cost per case is £417 on average. The government says it's a fair charge for a service which will not act as a barrier. The amount that they're going to charge won't act as a barrier. It's fair to charge given the cost of the system. But if you look at page 31, paragraph 3.7, and this is what the NAO says are very optimistic assumptions, there's a 30% dropout of existing people using the CSA. And we think part of that dropout will be because of the charges, that people will drop out because they can't use it. And the implication, I think, from what ministers have said to us, is they say they want to put more money, the CSA is expensive, they want to put more money into family services instead to help people agree, which we're very much in favour of, investing in good family support services. Of course it's better if parents can overcome conflict and deal amicably together with the child. But the implication was that savings were going to go from charging to family services. But what this makes clear, I think, in this report is how fundamental charges are to actually making the new system pay, of achieving the savings targets that are expected. We were told by the ministers that charging was not about cost cutting. Yet again, fee income, as figure 15 shows, if you look at the costs over the next 10 years of the current system compared to the future system, the only thing that makes it cheaper are charges. And it will be a significantly improved service, is what we've been promised as a result of these charges. But looking at figure 17, which is the very detailed look which the NAO take at IT, quite honestly, it makes me feel quite queasy. This has horrible signs of going pear-shaped. And it looks like parents are going to be asked to pay, this is money that's going to be taken away from children, that has become the kind of central way of reaching cost savings. And there's no guarantee that at the end of the day it is going to be a better service. And I can tell you now, parents will be incredibly angry and MPs will be inundated if people are making this sacrifice of charges to pay for the future scheme and it turns out not to work.
Okay, Stuart, and then Fiona.
Stuart, if it's on this.
I just wanted to ask you to tell us, to describe from the parents you talk to what a better service would look like.
It would be one, I think, that where they felt focused on getting money to children. The statutory aim of the system is supposed to be maximising the number of children with effective maintenance arrangements, and sometimes you feel that there's so much kind of that the focus seems to get lost in budget cuts, in whatever, that what their job is to get money to children, and I think sometimes parents for care feel that they're almost sort of on the sidelines to the calculation. Much more transparency, much more good communications with parents, and to be fair, some of these things are promised. A calculation that people can understand, and where they feel that the non-resident parents is a fair contribution is being asked for, and a fair look taken at the non-resident parents' income. I think there's a feeling of frustration that one of the dynamics in child maintenance disputes is about is the correct amount being paid? Now, those can be legitimate disputes. I think they're seen as rather an irritant by the agency. And there has to be some system where there is a degree of transparency about this is the basis of the calculation, this is the income, this is the percentage, this is the amount. And keeping in touch with parents about when payments are missed, what action is being taken. I think communication is one of the big things.
Just to clarify the NUO position in terms of fees, it was just going back a little bit, if I may. It's just to say that we're not questioning in the report whether or not they should introduce fees or how it would work. What our issue is around the fact that it is very difficult to predict what the fee income will be in that final year of the spending review, and then that creates a risk.
Okay. So the 1.15 billion of fee income in figure 15, how is that calculated? You say in the footnote that it's your analysis of Commission financial forecast, but how do you actually get to 1,150 million? This is on page 34.
These are the Commission's estimates of what the fee income will be over a 10-year period. So if I can refer you to figure 16, you can see how fee income will rise over the course. This is on page 36.
Right.
And that shows you how, in effect, fee income will raise over the period. What our concern has been is around, actually, towards the left-hand side, it's 2014-15, where the Commission estimates that it will bring in £71 million of fee income in that year. That is the final year of the spending review period. And so if the fee income turns out to be different from that, because
in which year? I don't see a 71.
These are the different scenarios. The actual
which one is 71? I see 75, 41, 20.
Yeah, these are the different extreme scenarios. The actual estimate they've got lies between the green and the blue. It's 71 is what they're predicting to bring in. I could show you the graphic where that is if you like.
It's just you've got the high, you've got Newman. My point is a simple one. You've typed the numbers for the high and for the low, but not for the one you're actually talking about.
If I give you figure, I apologise. Figure 14 on page 32 will give you the individual elements for 14-15 of you get 4 for the application fee, 4 million from that, 4 from enforcement, 21 from the parent with care, 42 with the non-resident parent. Those will add up to the 71 million that they expect to bring in.
Can I just ask, Stuart is waiting to come in, can I just ask, have you got evidence that would substantiate the basis for the scheme, which says that put in fees and more people will settle within families? Have you got evidence on that? I mean, I can understand, and I've got a lot of empathy with your view that it'll mean fewer going in, but have you got any evidence at all? Or is it just, is there anything you've done that sort of backs that up?
We're all trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. NAO has said that it thinks the Commission's estimates are over-optimistic. We've tried to ask, we've asked single parents what they will do, we've slightly been overtaken by the fact that the application charge the government have brought it down from £100 to £20, which, and I'm not sure in this assessment whether that is a factor that's been taken into account either in terms of the behavioural consequences. We've been doing some preliminary work in a big quantitative survey we're doing where we have raised it, but we're only getting very early results now. And what that suggests is that, interestingly, the parents of the care who've been spoken to so far, they are concerned not just about the deduction from their own money, but also the fact that the non-resident parent would have to pay a lot more. And that is putting them off, because that is money that wouldn't go to their children, that they'd have to pay, that would just be disappearing. And that is putting them off.
Okay, Stuart and then Amos.
Well, I think we might be veering into the border between a value judgment on the policy and the efficacy of value for money.
I think our concern is that you can't. I mean, and we share it with NAO. Is that there isn't any. We don't know. We absolutely don't know the behavioural implications of charging.
Yeah.
We have one. We're trying to find out as best as we can. We think the Commission. It looks from the survey as though the survey asked non-resident parents whether they would use the collection service, which, given that they're going to have to pay between 15 and 20% extra if they do, it wasn't surprising, I think, that only 13% said they would.
Can I take you back to the nuts and bolts of the new scheme? And I certainly can empathise with what you say about the old scheme, having sat in advice surgeries, looking at printouts, which are like hieroglyphics. I can't understand them. Everyone, I think, can understand what we've gone through. I mean, I've got 2 degrees and I struggle. And someone who's perhaps got reams of paper and doesn't get telephone calls answered will be very frustrating. And I can understand that, and I totally agree with that. Coming back to a very interesting point you made about the demographics of who we use the new system, do you see in the new system any mechanism to ensure that the new system moves away from easy wins, i.e. PAYE, into those more difficult areas, self-employed and those not working? Is there a mechanism to ensure that, or is it just a decision that's taken at a relatively low level?
I think it's pretty worrying what's going to happen to self-employed people. The service will definitely be cheaper and in some ways better in that it'll be based on last year's figures from HMRC, based on last year's earnings, the last complete year's earnings. And they will take that both from PAYE and from self-assessments. But they will only look at earnings. And in the case of self-employed people, they will not look at dividend income, other income, even though it'll be in front, they will have access to it through HMRC. Instead, they will rely on the parent with care raising it and saying that, can you look into this and see if there's any other income? The onus will be on the parent with care.
But don't you think that because every situation is different, that is a reasonable thing to request, that the parent would care if they do have legitimate suspicions about self-employed people hiding income? Then, because everyone is different.
I suppose the frustration is that CMEC potentially has access to that information. It'll be in the self-assessment that the non-resident parent has to submit. So why not make use of it when it's in front of you, I suppose, is our query in terms of ease.
Yeah.
I think there's no doubt that one of the advantages of the new system, one of the big things, will be that it'll hopefully be updated every year. That's the plan. And so hopefully we'll get away from these nil assessments. That they won't be allowed to continue indefinitely.
And one last question. On the nil assessments, has the trend been to increase those numbers over the last 5-6 years? Or have they remained as a proportion about the same?
I don't have the figures to hand. I can send you the figures for the last 5-10 years. I think I couldn't say what the trend is. I mean, I think that... I can't say.
I need, to be honest, the last 4 quarters, which is not entirely helpful, but December 2011, nil liability was 264,200, compared to March 2011 when it was 283,900. So over the last year, it has been coming down. But
that's a function of general improvement in the overall scheme.
I think it's probably reflected to also clearing the backlogs.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, as you were talking earlier on about the quality of service that you'd like, the much more responsive service, despite concerns about IT projects, the fact is really the only way to provide this sort of service is by having a much more effective IT environment, isn't it? Wouldn't you say? It's really not feasible to say.
No.
I'm not suggesting. Of course, there's a risk in doing it, but I'm just sort of, this is a road we're going to need to travel, I think.
A more automated system with, I think, some, because that will be cheaper and simpler, there has to be also room for flexibility at the margins. I think what's very alarming about IT is that it appears that the lessons haven't been learnt from previous attempts at reform. When the Office for Government Commerce says it's not satisfied that the Commission is an intelligent customer, that starts to worry me. The critical testing must now be performed in parallel with programme delivery to remain on track. That is pretty frightening.
Where have you got all of this from?
This is figure 17 on page 38. That makes me feel pretty queasy. The Commission told its Audit Committee there is a high risk that the change programme, which is the whole reform programme, may not deliver phase 2, which is the bit where existing cases get transferred, may not just deliver phase 2 functionality within the agreed timescale. Now that is a problem because one of the things that the government has given assurances about is that it won't start charging people until this system is really up and running and working effectively. Now, if that's going to be delayed, which is quite right, I think it's an absolute given that you can't possibly introduce charging until the system is effectively working. But of course, that's going to produce a vicious circle in that there will be less fee income if it's delayed, and yet what this report shows is how reliant the Commission is on fee income. And I think our concern is that rather than putting its own house in order and looking at internal efficiencies that it can make, there's been too ready a focus on taking money away from hard-working, parents, struggling parents, as the way to make the ends meet, to meet the cost charges. And we very much want the Commission to look at ways of becoming more efficient, which I think is what the NAO has come up with, that mean that they can make the savings reductions they've got to make without looking to charges as their number one way of doing that.
Right, final question, Meg.
Ms. Allbeson, seen a number of these changes through, and from your last answer, you seem to suggest that it's layering by trying to layer the one way of getting money in through fees on top of an imperfect system. That's the challenge. Do you think, in an ideal world, and we're not asking your comments on the policy, it's more about the value for money, that it would be better to get the system in order and then change the policy, and that there's a danger of confusion about where things are improving, or
Yes.
if indeed they do improve.
Yes, I mean, what the report showed is that they haven't got their target operating model in place yet, and they're planning to do it by March 2012. That's only 6 months before the new scheme is due to start. They've got no adequate plans on how they will achieve their cash efficiency savings of 151 million. Their planning tool is described as not fit for purpose. The costs of implementing the new scheme will cost more in the next 10 years than running the existing scheme, apart from if you introduce charges. Now, there's something wrong there which suggests that there needs to be a much, much tighter look taken at other efficiencies rather than relying on taking money away from very hard-pressed parents. By the time these charges are introduced, a lot of the tax and welfare cuts that will be are on the way will have really started to bite, and money transferred from one parent to another, sort of private transfers, will actually become crucially important in helping protect children from the effect of those welfare cuts.
Right, thank you. That was very clear and full and very helpful. So thank you very much indeed for your contribution this afternoon. Thank you.
She's the chair. The Iraqis will come in towards the end.
They're supposed to be staying at the end. I thought
They're staying. I'll talk to them if there's any of them who'd like to go on.
Just to say to members of the committee, we've got some Iraqi delegates coming in soon. So, and if anybody wants to stay at the end, more than welcome. Okay? But I think they're coming in. Hello. Hello. This is a very quiet session.
You want me to do something about that?
Until you arrive. Right. I'm going to actually, thank you very much, and thanks for waiting and listening to that as well. I'm going to actually start with a question to Noel Shanahan. Just to tell us, how long have you been in post?
Since the middle of last year, since May.
Right, thank you. So you've got your feet under the table then?
Yes.
And you're facing substantial challenges, both in terms of the money you've got to get out of the system and the new system that the government's decided to implement. As I read this report, the question that sort of threw out to me is, before we can have a sensible conversation about value for money and effectiveness, can you tell me that in the new settlement, what is the purpose of the agency? What are you trying to achieve? What are you there to do?
I think the quick headline answer to that is supporting separated families, securing children's futures. And that really says it all. We are in place to assist parents who are separating, to try and overcome their differences and to put in place family-based arrangements. For those that can't achieve that, we're there to run a statutory scheme that's as lean and mean, as efficient as we possibly can be. So it's both those. That's my brief.
It's not hope, it's not mean.
Yes.
So you still see your purpose, both now and in the transformed organisation, to maximise the support that you can give to families and children where they are separated.
Absolutely.
All right. So just get it clear. So I don't want to come to the fees straight away because that's obviously contentious, and we will want to get there. But if there's so much in the rest of the report which sort of calls into question whether or not you're able to achieve that. And I recognise you've come a long way. I think we all recognise the journey that you've come from, and that's well articulated in the report. You've reduced backlogs, you've reduced the length of time it takes to deal with new applications, and you've increased the money collected. So well done, but. And it's really the but. So if I just look at arrears, for example, there's £3.7 billion of arrears. For some reason, only a quarter of that is collectible. And then for an appalling reason, you only expect to collect less than half. That just strikes me as pretty worrying. That, there's a lot of money outstanding, which ought to be going to families with children. You're saying you can only collect a quarter of that. I don't understand that. And then even out of the thing you say you can collect it, and then you say, actually, we're only going to collect less than half.
I think the 3.7, 3.8 billion is really a legacy of the past. This is going back to arrears over the last 19 years. About 50% of it is due to the Secretary of State as well, so it's not all due to parents. But through that time, 10, 15 years ago, a number of the assessments were made incorrectly. There was a period of time where punitive maintenance agreements were put in place. Frankly, where one parent disappeared, we tried to track them down, couldn't get hold of them. We made an assessment on their income that was punitive to try and chase them down, to frighten them to contact us, to put a proper maintenance agreement in place. Those punitive agreements are still on the books, they're still on the record. They're not really a reflection of fact of what that individual was earning at that point in time. So there's a legacy in that 3.8 billion, which is frankly just incorrect.
Well, then why do you clean up the figures? Can they be? Why can't they just be cleaned up?
From the NEO point of view, we have always put a qualification on the account because of the difficulty we've got in terms of identifying A, the amount of the debt, and B, in terms of who it's attributable to.
It just seems to me straightforward. If there's a whole load in there which is rubbish, clean it up and start with a base that we can work with.
So the Commission is basically managing to keep new cases going and deal with contacts when parents get in touch with them. That they have not set themselves up to work their way through 1 million cases, many of which are for the reasons that Noel said.
But you've got to have clean, to assess yourself. It'd be your interest in, if you're getting your accounts qualified, yes. And one of the reasons is that I want to come back because there's still 1 billion of which you say is collectible, and you're only collecting less than half of that. If your accounts are being qualified because there's this crazy figure floating around that has got a historical legacy to it. Yes. Why on earth aren't we cleaning it up?
Well, so in the costs that we have in place for the new scheme, one of the things we have got to do is to sort out how much of this arrears we are actually going to be moving into the new system. I mean, that will require us to go through case by case to decide what these numbers actually are.
So how long will that take you?
What it's going to take, the plan at the moment is that will be done by 16, 17?
Best part of 3 years.
There's a lot of work in there, but we are now resourcing the Commission in order to make sure they can do that calculation, which has not been the case to date. And that's the way that we're going to take it forward.
The 50% recoverable is your number, isn't it? I think I'm right about that.
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, Amos, I didn't hear that.
50% estimate of recoverability comes from the agency.
50%?
So 50% of that number is an estimate of how much of that total number might be recoverable, which comes from the agency, as I understand it.
Right, so why? Okay, which is the second. So we've understood that 3.7 billion is out with the fairies, but there's 1 billion that you say is collectible, yet you're only expecting to collect, and I bet you go underneath that, less than half of that.
Yes, and absolutely, as Robert said, that is part of what we are geared up to try and collect as we go through the transition for effectively closing down the old systems, open up a new one.
Nothing. I don't think this has anything to do. I'm trying to steer away from the old versus new. You, not NAO, said there's £1 billion, about £1 billion collectible, but you're only collecting. So this is money due to family that children and families expect to have.
Can I try an explanation then? We've explained why so much of the past probably is based on almost entirely dodgy data. The next question you need to ask yourself is it actually cost effective to collect the sums of money? All right.
Cost effective to who?
To the people doing the collection, perhaps.
But what about to the families?
What price would you put on that?
Well, I've no idea, but if it's collectible and it's money owed to families and the purpose of the organisation, that's why I genuinely got very perturbed as I read this report. I thought, what's the purpose of the organisation? If the purpose of the organisation, which Noel Shanahan articulated, is to ensure that you get money, we can come back,
If you want to have a conversation about that, then let us write you a note about this, but I'm fairly sure, but I'll get Noel to correct me if I'm wrong, that actually there's a calculation here about actually how much would it cost to collect some of this debt. Now, it's not self-evident that in every case you'd want to collect it.
I can understand not in every case. I hear that, you know, there may be somebody moved, you know, to somewhere Antarctic or something, and you can't pursue them. But I mean, I can't believe that over half is just not collected out of the stuff that you say is collectible.
Well, let us give you a longer answer on why the Commission reached that judgment.
Given that outside agencies once you get to a certain point.
Sorry?
Do you use outside agencies once you get to a certain point, as some other public departments do, for collection?
For the actual collection of arrears? No, we don't.
We don't. Is that something you would consider looking at?
As part of the way in which the Commission has developed its enforcement procedures, we've now got access to a much richer set of data, including the sort of credit reference type data that gives us clues as to who actually might have cash and resources that we can actually target.
But you tried it before and it didn't work, is that right, more or less?
Yes, it's been tried before in terms of trying to use debt collection agencies, etc., with no success. Even some very touch points to see debt could be sold really can't be sold. It is really a difficult number that people see that it's very difficult to get. So it's not really a saleable prospect.
Why didn't it work before then? What were the reasons?
Frankly, chasing down the individuals and finding the individuals, many of these individuals have worked hard not to be found. And secondly, the basis of the calculation, as I said earlier, is so fraught with errors. Actually proving it is difficult.
That's why I asked the question, because debt collection agencies are very keen to take work on if they know who the person is and the debt is very clear. So are you saying that actually the real problem is you couldn't give them reliable data on which to go and act? Was that the real problem?
I think the amount of work to get it clean, that's correct. That's why we've got money set aside for 3 years to try and clean it up.
Debt collection agencies are one of the most flourishing business in modern Britain. Why can't you just put it out to the bailiffs?
Can we write that out? Because I think this will depend on the distribution of the size of these debts. I mean, if it's actually lots and lots and lots of £20, then, you know, that's a different proposition from if it's lots and lots and lots of 10,000.
Can I just ask? Sorry.
But your biggest problems are with the self-employed, aren't you? All the complaints I get are about orders not being enforced, husbands not paying, husbands evading it, husbands concealing their salary. Now, all that has to be dealt with. It's not being dealt with. There's a huge debt resulting from that. Why not just put the bailiffs in?
Okay, well, the bailiffs do go in where actually we think there's actually a case.
Well, they do for the rates and traffic offences and parking offences.
Well, they do for this too, at the point at which actually there is something which they can collect, right? So
anyway, you're going to let us have a note. It's just a big figure.
We're confusing what we are doing with the question the chair's asking, which is, you know, why do we think 1 billion is collectible, which is an interesting word, and then we propose to collect half of that?
Yeah.
Let's give you a proper.
Okay, and can I just ask something? In giving us that note, which we require quite quickly, so we can do our report, please. Can you also, do you tell parents when you can't collect it? Do you tell parents?
Yes, parents will be kept up to date with the position that we've got.
That's
with
not our
regard to
experience.
their
I mean, that's the reason I think you find all of us around this table. You will know because there's so many MPs' cases on this. That's not our experience, you see. So that there's a debt outstanding, and then I think if you told a parent, I mean, it'd be interesting if you go away. Just tell us in the note. But my experience as a constituency MP is that the parent doesn't know that you've thought it's uncollectible.
That's right. And the parents want to supply the agency with the information. My husband works at so-and-so, he's drawing a wage, he's working full-time, and it's usually ignored. It doesn't produce results.
It is fair to say that all too often right now, it is the client contacting us, prompting us, that drives us to investigate where we are on each of those cases. Not a position that we are happy with, a position that we're going to change, but it is fair point that's where it is right now.
One of the things your previous witness did was to say actually she hopes that when payments are not made, the Commission will be on their case. Okay, the whole point of the automated system that we're putting in place is that as soon as a payment is actually missed, we will know about it, our staff can act on it. No one is creating teams that will pursue it. I mean, that is simply not the case at the moment. We are essentially reactive, waiting for the parent with care to say, I didn't get the payment that month, right? All the sort of problems that you're identifying. We're trying to put ourselves in the driving seat so that when people are within the statutory scheme, which, you know, we don't want people to be, but if they are within the statutory scheme, then we will actually be much better able to support them.
Okay, well, we look forward to the note on that. What I'm trying to do in this first is to look at the existing systems and where are the inefficiencies, really, before we go to the the new system. Let me deal, so much to deal with, but let me deal with the offices. Why on earth have we got 64? I looked at this and I thought, I don't think any of my constituents ever actually have dealings with your organisation face to face. I don't know if my colleagues around the table do. All the dealings are either on the phone or by letter or by email. So what on earth are we doing having 64 offices around the place?
The report points out that in its early beginnings, the thought was there'll be a headquarters and 6 major offices. But through the course of the last 15, 20 years, CSA went on fire. There was a real issue. They grabbed as many civil servants and as many offices as they could to pile through the paperwork. We ended up at one point in time with 250-odd offices. As recent as 2002, it was 114. So 70 is still progress from 2002. Right now, we have a plan to reduce the number of offices, already down in our plans to 56. I have a plan to continue looking at it. But we need a reality check on what does it actually mean. In 45, almost 50 of our offices, we're talking about a handful of people who actually sit round a desk in a job centre plus site. They rent a few desks. It's not CSA offices. In reality,
how
we
many
have
of
about
those
20,
64?
45 sites where there's a handful
45 sites are Job Centre Plus sites.
They are
other DWP sites.
DWP sites, and we have visiting officers in them, investigators, court presenters. These are mobile workers who sit there.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense. Does anybody else want to ask anything on offices? But I just did look, it hit you. Now, let's go to the...
Sorry, can I just ask something, just since we're talking about it, forgive me. Then that makes sense to me, but why is the performance so variable? Do you mind me asking that? As we looked across all these sites, you see it's quite a broad... And I'm just interested to know what drives that in your view?
Yes, so...
Mind me asking, Chair, sorry?
So the question here is between our sort of regional offices, why is there such a difference in performance? Hands up, our ability to monitor productivity, case by case, site by site, service by service, is nowhere near where I want it to be, nowhere near. Our new system will give us rich data, which will allow me to monitor down to individual level performance and productivity. Right now, very difficult to do. We are using past historical performance and extrapolating forward. Not a good place to drive out cost. I have a new data warehouse coming in at the middle of this year for the new system. We have found a way to use it so I can put in there data that will help me to drive the current organisation structure and get closer, at least down to team manager level, to drive productivity. Is it as the report says? Yes, it is. Is it a position I'm happy with? No, it's not. Are we doing something about it? Yes, and the future system will let me drive down to individual performance. Sorry?
The time frame for that?
The data warehouse in the middle of this year lets me get down to team level on our current system. Future system will come with its rich texture of data, which will come through launch.
But you could start from this year.
Absolutely.
Making comparisons.
Absolutely.
And driving up productivity and driving down.
On offices, will a person always have the same office, the same person looking after them, and so I think, as the previous witness said, centred on the people who need help is I think what the objective should be. Will that happen in the new system?
I speak to lots of our clients, and one of their frustrations is each time I call, I can talk to a different person. Yeah. The nature of our opening hours is we can never guarantee you'll talk to the same person. However, the issue with our current systems is if any of us logged on now, to figure out what's going on with the case can take many minutes and many screens. On the new system, intuitive, straight there, right in front of you, any of us within seconds to see what's going on, to update the client. We're just not there right now. We're not there right now. And the thing that we are driving through this year, part of our efficiency drive this year, is too often we say to clients, we'll call you back. We don't know the details, we'll call you back. The most infuriating thing when I've touched points with our clients that really gets their goat, we've already jumped all over it, we've reduced callbacks by 80% just in the last 6 months. One and done. If you contact us, we want to sort your problems while you're on the phone. That's our drive, and that's where we want to get to, and that will drive out cost.
Okay, now if we look, I mean there are more, no doubt, other members. If we look, you're going to have to find £151 million in cuts. financial cuts. You've got to get, we'll come to the income, but you're anticipating in this spending review income of 71 million, and you're assuming 12 million in less work. That's the figures as I get it. Now, what the NAO says, and this is all by 14-15, not that long away. You've been in post for a year now, so you're well embedded. Why on earth haven't you got what the NAO can identify as proper plans? You know, you've got the figures, and you managed to tweedle a little bit more out of DWP in the middle of it. But why on earth haven't you sorted out how you're going to get to your cuts figure?
Okay, we have a number of plans in place. We did furnish them to the NAO. There are a number of steps in place. It's going to help us get to the £151 million saving. The first one is that all our work in the design automates our processes. So by the time we get to 14-15, a number of automated processes will take cost out of the system. We will be closing, you've heard...
That's assuming the IT is delivered on time?
Correct. And of course, we make sure that we take out the benefits of the new system and the automation.
But if the IT is not delivered on time, what difference does that make to your 151?
If it's delayed, it'll be a delay to the benefits that we take out.
It'll delay to a...
It would be a delay to the benefits, obviously.
How much?
I can't give you the exact number that would be, but generally speaking, if there's a delay of a month, it's going to be in the region of about £3 to £4 million.
So you're assuming it's in by, I can't remember when the date of the IT was in by.
October 12 is phase one.
So every month of delay in that takes £3 to £4 million out of the 151 million target by 2014-15.
I put it another way, it presents me with a challenge to find those £3 or £4 million somewhere else.
Well, of course, you've also got to challenge it, but are you worried about that, Mr. Devereux?
I certainly would be worried if we thought that the IT was going to be late. I mean, the thing which the report properly identifies is actually that the Commission's done really well recently in driving up productivity. So, I mean, you should not underestimate the extent to which, if there was some other problem, that no will be on the case anyway, because actually part of the...
But are you worried? Because it's, you know, we haven't come to the IT. The IT doesn't look the world's most organised and best managed project.
When we can finally give evidence on the IT and not just based on the stuff that's in here, then actually I'm happy to defend that.
You're confident the IT will be in? I mean, just reading the document.
Well, maybe we could turn to the
well,
words.
Let's deal with this. I'm trying to be logical.
Many of the words on the IT are correctly identifying what was the case, right? You will also find perfectly positive words about what is now the case, and there's a bit of a distinction here which is really worth drawing out, okay?
Just to clarify from our point of view, we were concerned with the state of the IT earlier on. There has been progress with it. The Commission has assured us that it will not introduce the system until it is happy it is up and running and it will work properly. What we cannot tell is whether the changes that have been brought in now are enough to mitigate those risks, and therefore whether it will hit that date.
So
the IT.
So the most recent review by the External Office of Government Commerce, when it looked at the Phase 1, said the team's view is that Phase 1 on its own merits a delivery confidence assessment of amber green. Right? It described the whole project as having substantial risks, which the programme is taking sensible steps to manage, meaning that the delivery confidence overall is amber. That's what's been recorded by OGC externally reviewed July 11. Right?
So presumably that was available to you?
It was indeed. And
you'll Figure 17.
You'll find it's referred to in Figure
17. Was that the report that concluded, the OGC report that concluded that the Commission's ability to act as an intelligent customer contributed to slippage? Was that the same report?
It is indeed, and it's the one where the word "had" I think might have been usefully introduced, because I mean it is clearly the case, as you can see from the bit at the bottom of that page in Figure 17, that the Commission embarked on a process to put this new IT system in, which was using the Agile system, which we talked about previously. In their case, this has not worked. They have changed horses, and that is what the OGC is referring to.
Where would you have inserted the word "had"?
Sorry?
Where would you have inserted the word "had"?
Between customer and contributed.
Had contributed, but no longer.
Sorry?
You mean had contributed, but no longer.
I've just read you their conclusion about the report, about the programme as it stands. I mean, my guess is that if they genuinely thought that we had a persistent inability to act as an intelligent customer, they would not have given us an amber green rating.
Well, we've seen lots of OGC reports over the years, and they come in all the colours of the rainbow. And Mr. Gibby is more than familiar with most, having been a veteran of the Rural Payments Agency. Can I just ask you,
what evidence? What other evidence can I bring you other than? I mean, I could go back to our own assertion, which you won't like. So at least I've tried an external review who's looked at the programme.
Is it still correct? Is it still correct? I'm reading from again figure 17. Mr. Gibby, can you just confirm this sentence here? Critical testing activities must now be performed in parallel with programme delivery to remain on track. That is that still the case, or is it something that was the case but is no longer the case?
That is our understanding of the case when we were up until Christmas. I don't know if it's moved on since then, but yes.
So, Mr. Devereux, critical testing activities must now be performed in parallel with programme delivery to remain on track. Is that still true?
It is.
Right. Can you give me some other examples of government programmes where testing activities were performed in parallel?
Probably the introduction of the employment support allowance.
Any others?
I don't know.
Tax credits, does it ring a bell? Criminal Records Bureau, does that ring a bell? Mm-hmm. Rural Payments Agency, does that ring a bell? That's what happened in all of them. That's what happened in all of them. The testing was done in parallel in all of them. Mm-hmm. In some, they hit the live button, the go live button, when they knew it didn't work properly. So, we are right to be concerned about this, aren't we?
You are right to be concerned about it, and you're right to assume that Noel and I are spending a lot of time actually making sure that actually we do know what's going on.
So you're not going to hit the live button until you're sure it works?
Absolutely not.
Even if it means a delay?
And you can assume that that's exactly where ministers are too. We are perfectly aware of the history.
I mean, it's great that you say we can assume, but the history of this, and I'm not talking about any particular administration. If we, sitting where we sit, and I've looked at these sorts of things for a while, sitting where we sit, if one is to assume something, generally, from history, one would assume the opposite, actually. So when you say you can assume, it's gratifying to hear, but it's not borne out by the track record in the past.
So what might be different now, I mean, I can only speak for the ministers I'm working with, is that we are spending an awful lot of time looking at deliberate plans for testing all the rest of it. Ministers know exactly where this programme is in a far greater detail than some others I've worked with. So
that's good.
I perfectly, their judgment is basically that this is not worth turning on, because you all know exactly what happens if you do turn on.
Can I just ask what's happened since July? This report is about July. I think Mr. Shalland could tell us about what's been happening since July. It's quite a few months ago. And what is the changes which have no doubt contributed to the confidence that Mr. Devereux is showing?
We've done now a bunch of our user acceptance testing. We'll highlight and throw up issues. We'll get those issues, we fix those issues. We have also now started to see what the end user interface is going to look like. So caseworkers, what does the machine look like for them? Employers, what does it look like for them? There will be a customer portal. That also has been completed. So we're starting to get a real lot of confidence in what this is going to look like and the dramatic difference it's going to be for our end users.
It's not usually my role to help the witnesses, but I think it's important to read the last couple of sentences of Figure 17, which do actually say the OGC concluded in July 2011. Well, you can read them as well as me, but those sentences are actually a lot more supportive of what's been going on.
Can I just ask a question from earlier in the report?
May I just answer that? I really don't want to mislead you. We are indeed right in the process of doing user acceptance testing now. As you will all know, particularly if you're actually, we have 90% of the code built, we're doing user acceptance testing. For me, the critical date is going to be sort of at around April, at the point at which we've finally gone through all of 5,000 test scripts. At that point, we're going to know what quality code we have actually built. That will be fundamental to the rest of our plans. So let us not pretend that April 12.
Is that phase one? Is that phase one of your implementation or phase two?
So there are two phases. The thing that we are intending to open in October is phase one. That does not come with charging. The charging is the thing that starts in July 13. What I've just described is the first pass of all the user testing for the thing that we want to turn on for October, right? And you will be perfectly aware from previous systems actually. Until you've completed the testing, you'd be wise not to make too many brave assertions. But that's the process that we're going through. So we know exactly where our checkpoints are on this programme. There's one in April, there's another one in August, there's another one in September before you turn it on. At each one of those, you should reasonably expect us to be asking very hard questions. Is this fit for purpose? Is it going to work? That's what we are proposing to do.
I don't have any objection to that. The point of the report talking about cost reduction is to say I agree with that, but also, like many people, having been involved in implementation of quite a number of IT systems, however well it goes, the fact is there's a reasonable, it may, and I certainly see it's a pathway to delivering better services. Okay, so supposing it goes really well, but just takes a bit longer, all we're saying is, given that in this review period we're talking about cost reductions being achieved and how confident you can be, we're simply saying, given that, don't you think that it'd be a good idea to try and have some other ways of making a target than relying on those cost reductions? Because by the time you know that if it isn't or isn't online in time, it's going to be a bit late in the period for you to retrieve it in some other way. That's really I don't want to sound like I'm trying to undermine what you're doing in terms of systems, because I'm not, actually.
I absolutely respect the point, and I think I've got two levers that I'm trying to pull upon. The first one is that I started off a number of months ago a line-by-line budget review of corporate headquarters spend. And I'm taking millions of pounds worth of cost out of that, which will help me in this spend and review period. Frankly, creating a buffer. So if I get a bit of a delay, I want to consume my own smoke as much as possible. So I'm finding money from that point of view. The second point is that as we start to increase take-on of the cases, we will be able to see what that volume take-up is. My headcount predictions to help me through transition go up. If I don't see the volume of cases coming across, I can manage my cost down by simply not recruiting. So I think I've got two strong levers. One, take out cost out of the organisation now, where we can afford to take cost out. Improve the service, existing service, which takes costs out. And three, a tight grip of recruitment of headcount, which will only be put in place if the demand is there on volume. And the third bit I've got in my pocket is I will have about 300 to 400 fixed-term appointees in the organisation that I can pull out at reasonably short notice too. So I have levers to manage down my cost base depending on what I see the volume is.
But you want the volume, your volume, you want it to be highish, don't you?
Sorry?
You want the volume to be high because you want to help families.
Well, ironically, if I really help families, they will go and sort themselves out in family-based arrangements.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Can I just take you on the cost cutting? Did you?
I just wanted to make sure before we left that is that I've understood. So what you're doing, if I understand it right, which I'm very encouraged by, is in addition to your sort of plan, you've building up a buffer. Yeah. So you're taking costs down a bit faster than planned to put yourself in a position to make target. Can you? Is it unfair at this stage to say what roughly how much we're talking about there?
Over this SR period, I can see my way to getting somewhere in the region of 20 to 30 million.
Right. Can I just ask? So, going back to the 151.
Yes.
I don't know how we got to the 1. But 151, which is a million. I'm right about that. I know it was 71. 150. Was it? I can't remember. Yeah, 151, 71. I can't. Never understand these ones, but. How much is coming out on just reorganising? I mean, I looked at figure 9 and was absolutely astounded. This organisation has been one since 2008, hasn't it? I mean, before you arrived.
Yes.
Well, maybe it's a question to Mr. Devereux. I can't for the life of me understand why we had to have two corporate structures for all those years.
Why do we have two corporate structures? The most obvious answer to this is that this is one of the reasons why the incoming government has decided to bring this NDBB back in-house. This has been at arm's length, and those are the choices which the NDBB made. It's clear that they've already changed that, so the report properly records that they've actually merged those two sets of structures already. When Noel
but
comes
why outhouse as an agency did they need two corporate structures?
That's a question which I think the Commission shouldn't answer.
Sorry?
I can help with that from as I've researched the history of this, is that there was a CSA structure. CMEC was then created effectively then to oversee CSA and think of new ways to create a new child maintenance service, and it had a separate structure. As time went on, that did look crazy. We've now merged them. By the end of this month, we will have taken 10% of the headcount out of head office out as we start to merge them. Part of my buffer I'm creating is driving savings further through that. So all the elements of two different corporate structures has gone.
Okay. What the report also says, and I know that the department doesn't quite agree with this, but I think there's sufficient evidence for us to have a go at it, is that Australia costs are much, Australia per capita costs are, or per family costs are much lower. And even if you play around a bit and say, I think you could play around a bit and say NAO's been generous to you in some respects, maybe they've been a bit wicked to you in other respects, but there is a disparity in those costs. So when are you going to see something which gives us a feel that you're efficient? Because the report is quite critical. At the very end it says, you're focusing on the new system. If you actually focused a little bit more on doing some of these streamlined service provision, process management, outsourcing potentially, that will cut your cost. That will get your costs out to meet your 150 plus your 71 plus your 12, without all these risks of new IT systems and collectability of income and all that sort of stuff.
So let me try to answer that. One is that Noel's just given you got a lengthy answer about what he is actually doing to drive cost out of the current operation, right? And he has a long track record of doing this. Secondly, actually, this IT system, you keep implying that it's some sort of free choice vote. Your previous witness wanted a system that actually enabled a good service. We simply cannot do good service on the current system, nor am I prepared to warrant that the current systems will still be operating.
But you've got to accept, I know this is a magically new government and you're a magically new permanent secretary. You've got to accept this is the third attempt at getting an IT system in that works out.
Okay, so if everybody who had two failures couldn't have another go, we'd all be dead.
We're a bit sceptical.
No, we would never have been born, I think is what you're trying to say.
Okay, so let me come back to the Australian thing, because it's a perfectly good question. I mean, you know what comparison numbers are like. I mean, my view is actually there is a gap here. Let me just run you through how I think the numbers work. You're being offered a comparison of in headline terms, 56 pence to 34 pence. About 5 pence of that, I reckon, is because of the cost of our clerical system. I mean, the Australians are not sitting with 150,000 cases being managed separately. About 7 pence is actually because actually the Australians are, as the report records, collecting more per person than we normally do, because actually the settlements are higher. But even having said all that, I might get us down to 44 pence against their 34 pence. That's still a gap. I've halved it probably. I mean, why is that? Probably because actually the Australians are ahead of us in terms of actually having a rather more modern system, but they've also got a different system out there. So their rules about where they can go to collect money, how they collect it, are different from ours. They have a different tax system. They use tax rebates. We don't. So I think it's a perfectly good challenge. You should expect both of us to be seriously on the case of driving value for money in this organisation. So if you do the same comparison of these pence per pound saved on even CMEX figures, they've gone from being 56 pence in 2005-6 down to 42 pence in 10-11. You can see an improvement happening there. So rather than sort of use Australia as the obvious benchmark, because it's quite difficult to do these calculations, I'd rather you pinned us with actual observed delivery on our own metrics, and that's exactly what we're prepared to be.
Okay, I accept that. I mean, I'm quite keen on international comparators, because it's very difficult with a lot of public services to find a benchmark against which, and against which you can then make those comparisons. So yes. I'm actually encouraging the NAO to give us these. Now, of course, sometimes there's a little bit apples and pears, and I accept there's a bit of a criticism there, but I think it gives us a very helpful benchmark where a service is unique. To try and get something to look at.
The other thing which public service in this country can do is be much better at benchmarking between units. All right, I mean, you've identified that.
Well, who would you benchmark this against?
Well, it was even benchmarking different parts of the organisation. I mean,
I see you.
I can tell you with NDWP.
Yeah, but I think there is some merit in international comparison.
Yeah, I think there is some merit, but let's not pretend it's precise science.
Okay. Fiona, then, and then Ian.
My question is that it seems to me that there are a set of figures about how much a case costs, which whirl around the ether, and we can't know what is the real cost per case. I mean, we have costs in Figure 7, but I went to the website of the Child Maintenance and Enforcement Commission and discovered that sitting there was something saying typical CSA cases can cost around £25,000, difficult ones £40,000 or more. And I just have this feeling that one of the things that's going on is both, look, we're making this as cheap as possible and being as efficient as possible, and look, this is really costly and really expensive and really important. And I kind of, it looks to me as though we've got a bit of having cake and eating it going on in terms of pushing both ends of the spectrum. And I really like to know what the truth is. Is it £25,000? Is it what you've just been saying?
So let's just get to the bottom of the 25,000 of the 400. The calculations that National Rule of Standing Figure 7 is taking spend in 1 year and essentially dividing it by...
If you turn it into, say, 15 years of an average case, that goes up to £6,225. Nowhere near £25,000.
Exactly. So the 25,000 number?
Yes, there were some example cases drawn out to try and say what would the lifetime costs of a case be, and the particular one with 25,000 was what has a typical case cost, extrapolate that over 19 years. The truth is the average for most of our cases is 9 years, but that was saying if there was a full from 0 to 19 years of age case, what would it typically cost on our current historic rates, really.
Why did you do that, for heaven's sake? If in fact it's only a 9 year?
It was requested by our minister.
And that did in negotiations with the Treasury, did it?
Exactly. That's the point I was seeking to make. You made it better.
The thing that is clear, I mean, I've spent weeks poring over this, that there is an awful lot of different moving parts in this story. There's a story about how many of the cases are there, how many of them are nil assessed, how many of those are actually then paying by direct maintenance, how many years are they playing for, how many children per case. I mean, genuinely, we could generate numbers all day, which is what you've identified. The trick, I think, is for us to be really clear what particular metric can we see continually going down.
But given that the purpose of this organisation, sorry to come back to this, Robert, but I think it's really important, given that the purpose of this organisation, as articulated by the beginning, is to maximise the amount of support that can go to families and children, right? Given that's purpose, it's not. It's a bit disturbing that you get a distortion of the cost to the state of administering a case, which then may lead you to a conclusion which is not necessarily in the interests of families and children. Now, I don't normally do that, but it just strikes me, having heard that toing and froing, that if your purpose is to maximise, we need figures that we can all understand and which are honest and transparent, and this government is committed to that.
Can I come back to this? Because what Anol said at the start was absolutely correct. What ministers want to do is to give the best possible support for separating families, right? And I think you've consistently interpreted that as the biggest possible amount of money collected through the collection agency. These are different things. So when he says he wants the best possible support, that includes helping people reach arrangements that get nowhere near the collection service.
But you don't want to give a false picture of the cost of the service as a way of justifying reducing the use of the service. I think we're all in this room.
I don't want to do that either.
Well, that's what this apparently from Fiona got.
I mean, these two cases appear in a press notice for the Commission. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't describe them as typical cases. They are very extreme examples, hypothetical examples of what can happen.
I'm sorry, I just looked in my preparation for this meeting at their website.
Yes.
Because it seemed to me that that's a sensible point to look at how the Commission itself is describing its costs. So I went to the bit of the website which talked about costs, and this was what was there. It wasn't a...
I'm sorry, I fully agree.
If that is what's on the Commission's website, then let us go away and make sure it has a rather more straightforward exposition as you've just described.
Thank you. Somebody else is coming. Ian.
On this committee, obviously, we're about value for money, and as we often remind ourselves, that's not just about money, it's about services. And a lot of people watching this hearing, in a sense, will care less about the cost, the operating cost, but a lot more about the service that's being delivered. So just looking at figure 4 in the report, which talks about the number of children benefiting from statutory schemes and various other metrics. I'd like to know, and by the way, I think the agency should be congratulated on progress on a number of those metrics from, frankly, a diabolical position a few years ago. But I'd like to know, in amongst all this cost saving and change that you're talking about, what can your customers expect on these metrics and then any other customer service metrics which you think are important in delivering the agency's work?
Yeah, I would be very upfront and say I think that the people at CMET and CSA have done a sterling job on bringing these numbers forward, but all of us would admit the service we deliver to our customers is not one we're yet proud of. We know there's a long way to go on that.
So how do we, in terms of, if you like, holding you to account in future then, what kind of things are you looking at? Are these the key measures, or are there other measures?
No,
where do you expect them to be?
There are some real key service measures for me which will drive up customer satisfaction and service, but at the same time will drive out costs. So, for example, when we have the new scheme in and it's working, right now, new applications take us about 3 months to go through the process and bring online, up to 12 weeks. We'll be doing that in less than 4 weeks. Now...
So that's the statistic, applications cleared within 12 weeks.
Yep.
Your new target will be a percentage to be cleared within 4 weeks.
We'll be looking to clear them in 4 weeks. Okay. One of the real key elements is if somebody lets us know what we call a change of circumstance, where perhaps the non-resident parent's pay has changed, that can take us right now up to 12 weeks to alter the payments scheme. We're actually going to start moving on that a lot faster. We're going to look to be doing that within 5 days. So again, another quick change, making a material difference. If somebody doesn't pay their child maintenance right now, that can take us the best part of 3 months to chase them down and reinstate that. Under the new process, within 3 days, we will have dedicated outbound calling teams chasing them down, chasing them for the money. So we are going to drive through a range of service improvements that will be better for clients, drive out costs because we won't have people chasing us, we'll be proactively doing it. So drive out costs and therefore better for the taxpayer as well.
And you think that actually driving for those new standards will of themselves drive out costs as well?
It will, because right now, as an example, in excess of 20% of the calls that we take, and we take 4 million calls, are people just saying, when am I due my next payment? What's it meant to be?
Right.
Part of our new service is that people will be able to update themselves, what they should expect, when they should expect it, and when it's arrived. That will drive out, in that case, 20% of our call volume.
It's very encouraging ambition, and I think if you achieve anything like that, it would be a fantastic lesson for others, because those will be enormous changes and lead to much higher satisfaction. So good luck with all of that.
Can we now go to the charges? I think, unless anybody... Oh, you want to... Oh, yeah, Stuart?
I just wanted to get an understanding of the particular challenges you face and why you're looking at those timescales. If I don't pay my post office account telephone bill on the second reminder, they will call me within 48 hours and say you haven't paid the bill, and they'll be putting quite a bit of pressure on me, and then within a reasonable period they're going to be sending me nasty letters. I just wonder, is it the sheer volume of numbers that you're dealing with vis-a-vis the number of people administering those numbers that means you can't reduce that time? Because it still seems...
Sorry, you just described how quickly they get on the phone after your second reminder. Noel's talking about the actual act of not payment. So, I mean...
Yeah, but I've got a direct debit. If I don't pay it, if it gets bounced, they're straight on the phone. I mean, that is an arrangement. I'm just trying to get an idea of the reason that you can't...
You were talking about 3 days, weren't you?
Do you mean currently?
Yeah.
Currently, I had to say it's heavily a function of the IT system does not flag anything up to us to tell us you haven't paid. All too often, there is the parent with care who contacts us to say my payment hasn't come through. Not proud of it, but fact of life and where we're at. We don't
spend £500 million designing a computer system to replace another computer system that didn't work. I'm talking about the one that you're now about to replace, because, as the Chair said earlier, this is the third. And not include something that flags up when payments didn't occur when they were supposed to.
So we are. So I think that we're trying cross purposes here. So the answer to the question why we can't do it now, because the current system doesn't tell us.
Yes, what I'm really asking is Ms. Jackson's highlighting a very interesting point, and Mr. Shanahan's answer was very clear. What I'm just curious about is, we're talking now, we knew 7 or 8 years ago we had a computer system that replaced the previous system, and it's that system that can't tell you whether...
Instantaneously it can't. Eventually you can pull off...
How can one design a system and spend so much money on it that can't do something so basic? That's really what I'm curious about.
That's a very good question, which I would have to go and research, because as you're observing, this is 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, this is not...
Who was responsible for it, is it? It
Understood.
just drives me mad, you know. It's one of the real frustrations with the committee is that this happened presumably 2007.
2003 was the last.
So who was responsible then? Who's running?
I'd have to let you know.
Is that person still in the civil service?
I believe not.
I declare an interest. I was on the bill committee for the child maintenance and other payments bill for my sins, and we were promised a Rolls-Royce service from what we'd had before. And Mr. Bacon makes very.
Who was the civil servant?
It was 5 years ago, Chair.
But I
think it's a very valid question.
Let us tell you.
Honourable tradition of going from the Department for Transport to the Department for Work and Pensions, is there not, Mr. Deputy?
Honourable tradition. No, well, I have no idea.
From clogged traffic to clogged computer systems.
I know. But as I said previously, I mean, I don't know what my possible defence can be here. Noel and I are not getting out of bed every day trying to make a failure out of this. Actually, we think we're going to try and succeed in this. Okay. Now, you're entitled to be sceptical until you see it switched on, but we're entitled to be proud of what we're doing and think we are going to do it.
Okay, Austin, then Meg.
Well, you're expecting to save 12 million or so by doing less work. Is that because more people are going to be coming to voluntary arrangements between themselves? And why should they do that? Why are voluntary arrangements going to increase? And who's going to police them if they break down? And we all know that domestic breakdowns can be kind of Who'nized and become a very bitter war over money. So who's going to ensure that voluntary arrangements are actually enforced?
Sorry, can I just, do you mind if I just go back to the policy question? Because we're still asking the question in exactly the same way in which the system has worked to date, that CMEC is there as a stick in order to get in between two parties who are separated, right? It is absolutely central to this government's policy that that's not a clever way to actually operate, and that the best thing to do on all grounds is to try to support families, either not to separate in the first place, but if they are separating them, to give themselves some support to actually ensure that they can actually be civil and get something sorted out.
Given the cumbersome nature of the old CSA and the difficulty of getting money out of it was always sensible to have an arrangement between yourselves anyway.
Yes, it was, but I mean, the question which ministers are asking themselves is, could we do a lot better if we actually put better support in place at the point at which people were either separating or coming to the Commission in the first place, right? So the whole idea of the gateway to the services which Noel will offer in the future is to try to make sure people are fully appraised of all the support they can get, all the things they could do to actually support themselves and their children through separation.
Yeah, but this is a gateway, therefore, that's going to be turning people away. If they are turned away into an arrangement between themselves, who enforces it? If the husband rats, what happens?
Okay, so two things. The point of this is not to turn them. The point here is to actually say it would be better, and we will try to support you, to reach your own agreement, because actually what I most want is for parents to actually take some common, consistent sense of looking after their children over the long time. The money is one element of that, but it's important to get that straight. Now, if they don't actually decide, if they go through that route and make a family-based arrangement and then it fails subsequently, they always have the opportunity to come back again, obviously. But the contention of this policy is actually it would be better to get more people in that position in the first place. If they then come in through this gateway, the first thing we will offer them is to say, well, actually, I'll tell you what we'll do, we can simply calculate how much you ought to be paying each other, right? And having heard that number, calculated by the Commission, you may go away and create yourself a family-based arrangement.
You don't charge them for that?
We will charge them one fee for doing the calculation.
Well, how much is that?
£25.
Okay, can I ask you some just... Oh, actually,
can I finish the answer? Because this is quite important, because these steps are all important. First of all, let's try to make sure we support them before they come anywhere near. Next, let's offer them calculation service. Thirdly, let's say, actually, well, if you want us to help you put this in place, we'll calculate a maintenance direct arrangement whereby we will explain how much money should be paid and you will put that in payment. The point about that is actually that then becomes a transfer back to your direct debit from one party to the other, nowhere near null. However, it is an enforceable obligation. So if the parent with care rings up and says, you know that maintenance direct we put in place, actually he or she hasn't paid, immediately we can put it back into the enforcement system, it goes into collection. So all those three options exist before you get to the people actually having decided they've looked at all of those, they don't want to do it, they go straight into the collection system. Now all of that is a very deliberate act of policy to try consistently to make sure that people are reaching their own agreement and not seeing the state as a thing which can most usefully sit between two parties who are separating.
Okay, well let me tell Mr. Shannon, all these are imponderables. You don't know how many people are going to be turned away, you don't know how many people are going to make their own arrangements, you don't know what you're going to be able to do to help those, but you are going to charge a fee for it. Now, if you've been able to make the kind of savings you are expected to make on the first calculation, if you've been able to make more savings, you wouldn't have to charge a fee. And it seems to me that the fee is becoming an alternative fee for service, and you're going to be taking about between 22 and 32 pence out of every pound that is headed for the kids, to support the kids, which you said is the main object of the exercise. You're snaffling 32p from every pound. That's an alternative to cuts. Why don't you make more cuts and give more to the kids?
Okay, so I'm going to come back on the policy first of all. First of all, I think you've just added together the charge for the non-resident parent and the charge for the parent with care. The charge for the non-resident parent is in addition to the money going to the children, not a subtraction. And the point about the charging is actually to reinforce the sense that coming to the state is actually the least best option. It's a deliberate...
The state set up this machinery to help kids, and there was no charge imposed then.
Sorry?
I mean, this machinery is there to serve the kids, not to exact a charge.
Yes, but what I'm trying to describe, as careful as I can, is actually Minister's conception of what is actually wrong and needs to be fixed is bigger than simply fixing the CSA collection system. And so the whole idea of trying to get parents to be more self-determining in the way they sort this out, rather than immediately put a third party in the room, because all the evidence is as soon as you have a third party in the room as well, relationships deteriorate, and that is not good for the children, over and above the money, Well, Ian Duncan-Smith tells us in a letter that we have failed to recognise that the charging regime is a key part of a much bigger vision for supporting families. It seems to me it's a key part of a vision for taking 32 pence out of every pound that goes to families. Well, I'm going to repeat myself.
Okay, I'm going to stop that because I recognise where it's going. Let's go to Meg.
If I could ask Mr Shanahan, the report is pretty damning about the business plans that you've got. I point to page 33 where just the headline alone says the Commission's business plans are unlikely to be sustainable, but also if you look at figure 13, there is an acknowledged, I think you agree this, that you're in a 5-year period where between 2013 and 2018, where the gross cost is significantly bigger than the operational cost. And then, as if by magic, after that, it is almost exactly aligned. Now, how robust are your figures? Do you agree with this? And how can you convince us that's the case? And can you explain why that gap is so big at that point?
Yes, there's a big, heavy lifting job to be done to take 1 million cases across 2 or 3 different existing out-of-date platforms, contact those clients, try and assist them to come to family-based arrangements. Well, if that doesn't work, to then transition them onto a new system, the new future system. So we will have to employ a lot of work and activity for about a 3-year period to move those clients from our existing systems to our new systems. So you'll see as that drops down and the lines get closer, 2017-18, that's off the back of the transition coming to an end. That's off the back of our investment on the IT and the transition investment falling away. We'll be driving down the costs right across operations, and that comes out. Also, our corporate HQ, the costs come down in excess of 40% for that period in time too. So there's going to be a very, very small margin there between the overall operational costs and gross costs. So the big gap is our investment. This is really a invest to save programme. There's no two ways about it.
So how can you convince us, though, that that's robust? Because you've got this big box of difficult cases. They're difficult, some of them for a reason, some because they've been delayed. What are your assumptions in projecting it over that timescale? What have you assumed?
We've done some effectively time and motion study in terms of how easy will it be to get hold of people, how many phone calls do we need to make, how many letters, how many conversations, how many of these cases can we transition in every month. It's up to about 30-odd thousand a month we believe we can do. And we've put that into our overall corporate system, and that's kicked out the costs, the headcount and everything else that's required.
Can I ask you, how many clients have you spoken to?
I have spoken to several hundred clients. I've attended... Clients. I've attended focus groups with dozens of clients.
Okay.
Sorry, now I'm just get myself back on track. You talk about, so you've done your modelling, but have you done some modelling to accept that some people might not be traceable now, and what are you going to do about that?
Absolutely. We have in our model to assume that there's so many cut-off points, so many times we write to them, so many times we will go through a HMRC database to see if we can find them. We are linked up with Experian to try and track people down from other bills, etc. Standard stuff to try and track people, we've got. There is a point whereby if we just can't get hold of people, we close the case.
So you wouldn't, at that point, pass them over to... I suppose a bailiff wouldn't be interested because they wouldn't be able to trace them.
A bailiff won't be interested because we know where to go, but the point on debt collection, we've opened up the conversations, we're talking about what the possibilities are, and they're just not massively hopeful because generally debt collectors want clean data, know where their targets are, know where their returns are.
So what are your assumptions on failure rate in terms of contacting parents who are not coughing up at the moment? For whatever reason, whether it's your delay or whether it's because they're not wanting to.
We suspect somewhere in the range of about 20% are just going to be very, very difficult to get hold of.
Okay. I mean, I am a veteran of the border agency for my sins, and over the years as MPs we've seen promises, ministers meant them, ministers intended that they would be delivered, and you see workarounds. So first of all it's that everything will be done by a certain date, and then it'll be done but in a slightly different way, or we'll make an initial set date judgment, but we've got the paperwork to follow. Can you sit here now and tell us that it's not going to be messy like that it's actually going to be as you described, and how can you convince us that that's the case, and that you've done the maths right? Because clearly that's the key thing for us as a committee.
The big item on this, and it's one of the lessons from 2003, in fact from 93 as well, is that the button was pressed to go live on a system that really just wasn't going to work well enough. That's the biggest lesson we have to take. Whatever pressures are on us, we cannot go live with this unless we know it's going to work well. So inevitably, there's IT, there'll be some workarounds, I'm sure. It's never be perfect. Anything I've ever been involved in is never 100%. But actually, what's really workable, what's really deliverable, that's what we've got to aim for. And anything that falls short of that, we shouldn't press the button to go live. It'll cost us all in the wrong run if we do.
Okay, well, I'm sure other committees will ask ministers about that. Can I just ask, you've moved from the DVLA to this job. How long are you intending to be at the Commission?
You'll see on that chart...
We'd love to have you back, is what we're really saying.
You'll see on that chart, 2017 is the end of transition. So what I want on this is to be able to say, I, with the team that's here, that's in place in CMEC, really transformed the legacy of CSA to a new organisation with new results. Great news for our clients, great news for the taxpayer.
So you'll come back to us in 2017?
I'd look forward to doing that.
I was guessing you would ask us back before then.
Well, yes, possibly before then. But
2017, right?
2017 might be the triumphant return.
Chris is coming in, but I just wanted to
It'll be an Olympic event by then, I should think.
I want to get clear. You've said, I tot it up. It's 234 million quid you've got to get out of your budget. Some of it by less work, all these bits you're adding together. Maybe it's even a higher figure. You told us earlier that you've reduced costs anyway more than the 151. So you've taken you've done some work so that if there's delays, as we've talked about, you won't find you don't meet your budget. How much have you taken out? I mean, no, as I understand it, NAO hasn't seen that. We would like to have some feel for what it is we've done and whether we
had information on the 151, which is the plan. We know that there was a kind of fundamental review of costs that was being kicked off, and I think you mentioned that was about 30 million. I think was the figure you thought might.
Way to get an additional 20 to 30 million. So to answer on the 151, we have already this year we will deliver at corporate head office will be 10% less headcount. The operational costs we will deliver by the end of this year will be 10% less than last year as well. We have got an operational programme going through that will deliver 8% reduction as well through the course of this year. Right now,
what's the figures on that?
They're all totting up to my 151, but I hold my hand up and say I'm about 16 million light that I have today not got a plan. This is in 3 years' time. I mentioned earlier about not being happy on where we are with productivity measures and tools. I'm going to have something far better than we've got now within the year. That I'm going to use as a big tool to help me deliver on that 151.
But a lot of your savings, financial savings, are dependent on the new scheme, which comes in 14-15, basically. So if there is a delay in the IT, accepting that, the miracle's going to happen, you're going to get it in on time. But if there were ever possibly to be a delay in the IT, or if you just happen to get it wrong on the behavioural change and the income therefore you're likely to get in, what then? Where's your contingency on that?
My contingency I referred to earlier on two parts. First of all, I'm taking cost out now and I can see where I can get that buffer over this spending review period. The second one, and it's the real big lever, I will be absolutely tight on take-up. If I'm tight on take-up, I can manage my cost base, headcount largely, and I can manage that cost base so it doesn't increase unless the volume comes in matches it.
What do you mean you can be tight on take-up?
In 2014, the volume...
You can refuse people who come to you for their service?
No, if the number of customers coming through isn't as high as we anticipate...
You can take people out?
I won't recruit.
Yeah, but if it is?
We will.
And that's in the plan.
Can I just to be clear then, and taking it as it is on the table. So if it all goes according to plan, with what you've got going on, you're going to come in with lower costs and budget, right? Supposing that it all launches off on time. I know it's a contingency, but you could. I'm not asking you to commit to it. I'm just saying, if it all went according to plan, you'd come in below where your current cost budget is.
Amy, you can't have it both ways. I mean, you either ask us questions that say we'll never make the budget, or you're asking for contingency. If everything went well, we'd all be happy.
The question's to know.
I took from the report, and it was fair, insufficient contingency. I'm making some. I need wriggle room because life on IT means you need it, and I want it.
Me now. I'm just asking a question, which is, it went beautifully. You've got some capacity to perform. It sounds like
that would be the ideal world for me.
It might just be worth observing that there are large future savings already written into public spending which have not yet been doled out. So there's a further round of austerity to come here.
Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to. My question has just been taken by you, Chairman, and by Amy, so that's really kind of you. But I just wanted to say that because I was particularly worried. I mean, the whole point of this report basically leads to this point about contingency and the fact you didn't have one, and that somewhere down the line you were going to have a crunch point, which wouldn't look very pretty. I've happily taken on board what you've said. I mean, I desperately want you to work because you provide me with the majority of my casework, like most of the other people around here, and I don't think the system works particularly professionally now for the parents that I deal with on both sides of the equation, actually fathers and mothers. So I think there's a big job for you to do. So I happily support the policy, which I know we're not a policy committee. I'm very pleased to hear what you've said. But I was just concerned with the phrase you mentioned earlier, which was the big, heavy lift. And I just wonder if you could just take us through that big heavy lift in a bit more detail, because that really does affect your contingency at the end of the day, does it not?
Yes, it does, and it'll all be down to the accuracy of our planning and timing. But if you imagine we've got 1 million clients, we're going to have a look at each case, communicate, because each of our cases has got 2 clients, 2 parts to it, communicate with both of them. In part of that communication, make it very clear there are alternatives to the CSA, alternatives to the statutory scheme. The support mechanisms that are in place to support them in coming to family-based arrangements. So that's quite a job of work. There's no two ways about it. But that's why we've got 3 years to do that. So a range of communications. The Minister announced recently £20 million worth of support for family services to support people come to their own family-based arrangements. So there's a range of tools in place that we need to point people out, help guide people to. But yes, absolutely, we're there for a fallback if people need us. But ultimately, we still can have legal cover to apply enforcement, but people can start off with arrangements through the CSA they don't have to pay for under our maintenance direct option. So the payments are only there for people that simply don't pay, who don't want to automatically pay. If they can do it themselves, it's free of charge.
And can you just clarify when you're going to flick the switch on the IT for?
Our target date and everything we're geared for is October 12 on phase 1, that's new applications. The midway through 2013 is when we go on phase 2, which introduces the charging process, and it's only then and after then we would start to transition cases from the old system to the new system.
And currently you're on track for that?
And we're focused to deliver that.
Ian, Austin, then I think I'll...
Yeah. Okay. Right. Just, you mentioned a few minutes ago the HMRC database in tracking people, and I think for many of your clients, and indeed a lot of the people around this table, there's always something of a surprise at the lack of joined-up work that goes on in some of these agencies. And so I was wondering how you see the new universal credit system, which should be in way before the end of this timescale, hopefully, and how you see that affecting your work in terms of tracking people down and so on, but also answering the question of the previous witness about using income data, which is available to you by some means, in order to influence your work. Because I think we heard from I think you were in the room, from the previous witness, that it's very frustrating for clients having to try and report on activities of former partners when actually the agencies have already got data about their income and so on. So really my question is about joined up thinking and how universal credit might affect your work.
Can I do the universal credit and you pick up the bit about the earnings bit? I mean, the thing which this programme is designed to do, and it was designed way before universal credit was invented, is to make sure there is a regular annual feed of how much earnings the non-resident parent has actually got. What the universal credit system does is to take that on one stage further and starts producing monthly amounts of how much people have earned in order to adjust their benefits. It is not strictly necessary within the bounds of the scheme that we're currently designed for CMET for it to be a monthly calculation. I mean, you can hypothesise that maybe it would be even more accurate if we did it monthly, and in principle you could do that. You wouldn't thank me either to make it more complicated at this stage. So I think the main answer about that is actually the way this is going to go. It's such a big step forward for the Commission to have regular annual feeds of what the data is, exactly as the lady from Gingerbread said, that actually we'll bank that, and I don't think you need to worry particularly that although there's a further step happening for universal credit, that it necessarily casts a shadow over this.
Okay, so the real question then is, to what extent you then use that data that you have from the system, that as the lady from Gingerbread said, frustration that even where you know data, it doesn't appear to affect the outcome until somebody appeals or complains.
Yes, we use the data from HMRC. If for any particular reason it's not just self-employed people, it's employed people, the parent with care says actually the amount that you're saying I'm going to get in child maintenance doesn't fit with the lifestyle of the other partner.
Yeah.
They come to us, they talk us through where there's evidence, where there's an opportunity for us to track it down and check it out, we will do that. I have to say it's very difficult. Sometimes people's lifestyle is not in line with their PAYEs. We do what we can to check it out.
Well, we all know examples of that. But my question is: are you going to build in the assumptions that you already have about a partner's income, and have any automated way of ever checking that against what their income actually is in the HMRC system? I mean, that's the basic question.
Well, we are to cross-pose. So the whole point of this system is the data that HMRC has got on somebody's earnings is the thing that no one will have access to. So he's not ringing up occasionally. That's fundamental to the design of the system. That's a different point from saying, is what HMRC got a fair reflection of the individual's lifestyle?
But then uses it before the person comes and says the lifestyle's out. Okay, so that will come.
Absolutely, it's part of the process.
That's easy.
The annual review that was referred to in this report is precisely the act of actually getting the latest year's data from HMRC and updating the earnings. And so instead of waiting for a million parents with care to come and say, I think he earns some.
Do that include income as well as earnings? Sorry, I wasn't quite clear. Is that going to include income, all income, not just earnings?
Yes. Okay. So I'm not sure I know the answer to that question.
Yeah, as it stands right now, it's all the income that comes through the PAYE. That's the policy that we've got.
It's not the.
So it's not all income.
All income.
No.
Well, but when you this was my question, but I mean, if you don't mind, Charles, because this is precisely the point, and it was the point that the witness from Gingerbread made. HMRC has information about income, not PAYE, but income. If you are the owner of lots of shares in, well, no, Woolworth is a bad example, but if you're the owner of shares that pay dividends, then the HMRC takes that into account in assessing your overall tax liability, does it not, Mr. Shanahan? It does. You're nodding, but the record can't reflect that. Could you just say yes or no to my
Could you repeat the question for me, please?
I know you're not a tax expert, you've done other things, but am I right in thinking that when HMRC assesses someone's tax liability, they take into account all their income, including income that they will have received from dividends? Yes?
Yes.
Right. Now, so am I right in thinking, therefore, as the witness from Gingerbread said, you have in front of you this thing called dividend income, but you're not going to take any notice of it?
No,
that's wrong.
I think
is that wrong?
I think that is wrong, because actually we are not going to be collecting information that we're not going to use. That's a very fundamental principle of data.
But you're not asking for all the income then, are you?
Exactly. So you're asking an interesting question to which I genuinely don't know the answer, which is, have we self-limited ourselves to earnings, which is an interesting concept but not income? Or is there a way in which we could use income?
This is not a policy question. In the interest of...
No, it is a policy.
Mr. Shanahan...
It is a policy question, because it depends...
No, it's not. The question is about efficiency and effectiveness of doing your job, doing the job for which the policy is designed to doing the job which the policy is designed to deliver. And this committee looks at value for money, which is comprised of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And if you have information, there is available to government information which you're ignoring, that does raise questions about effectiveness, which is the remit of this committee. I'm just curious about it, because if you're then relying on the parents with care to come forward and say, well, actually, I know he owns loads of shares and he's got all this extra income coming in, that is less effective than if you take advantage of the fact that you already know that information, isn't it? Mr. Shanahan, once again, nodding doesn't really cut it for me. Yes, thank you. It's less effective. You agree that it's less effective? Thank you.
Well, that was what was behind my question, which I'm glad Mr. Bacon clarified, because I didn't ask it in enough detail. But can you say, if the carer comes forward and makes the comments that you referred to earlier about lifestyle and so on, you would then go and be looking at all sources of income. Is that the case?
Can I come back? I mean, I do think this is a policy question. I mean, either ministers have determined that they want this based on earnings, or they decide based on income. I can see exactly why everybody thinks income is the right answer. Can I write you a note to explain whether or not it is either income, or if it is actually deliberately earnings, what rationale people have thought about for that? But I doubt very much if at any stage the Commission is in possession of facts which they cannot themselves put straight into their computer, because actually that's not the way data sharing normally works under legislative constraints.
That note would be very useful. Can I just...
So let us offer it to you, because quite genuinely, the point that she made was I wasn't...
And then Austin.
Sorry, can I just clarify on one thing, if I may? I can't comment on the income thing, but I think the other point to bear in mind is that it's the last of the self-assessment or tax return that's used for the next set of maintenance payments. I think there's a 25% tolerance, isn't there, in terms of whether you would adjust. So I think as long as it's within 25%, it doesn't change from that.
When you come in, you're going to have... Oh, God, I shouldn't come in.
That's a different point. I mean, let us write you know. I perfectly understand the question. I just don't know the answer.
Okay. Stuart, did you want to come in on that point?
Just a question about whether you're satisfied that you've got the capability to track people down. And I say that because I understand that you're at the moment participating in pilot projects with the Electoral Commission on data matching, and DWP is the lead department. So presumably there is the capability, albeit it's a small scale, amongst a small number of areas, including my own constituency, Peterborough. So would you look to develop something similar? Because that's about actually physically tracking people down. In this case, to find out that they're registered to vote, but it can be used. That's the first thing. Second thing, very briefly, right back at the beginning of your evidence, you talked about the imposition of punitive fees. It seemed to me, in terms of the legacy issues into the new organisation, that punitive fees were in inverse proportion to the chance of ever catching up with people. I just wondered, are you going to pursue a similar policy? Because the method, I don't understand the rationale for punitive fees if you were never going to track people down. Because it seems to me that has totally skewed the figures in terms of likely income. If you're just saying, well, 10% will give punitive fees, you're never going to catch up with these people. I just wonder what your particular view on that one is.
Can I just correct? He wasn't talking about punitive fees, he was talking about punitive assessments. For reasons which...
My error, assessment.
Okay. Yeah. So clearly the thought process was, actually, I'm not making progress here, let us, as it were, put a rather generous assessment, punitive, in front of this individual to see if that concentrates their mind. The reason we got into explaining that is because that's the thing which is actually sitting in the database at the moment, calculating all these 3.7 billion arrears, and almost certainly it's wrong.
But to use the technical term, it's buggered up the figures, really, isn't it?
Correct. I think that's a very technical example.
Right.
And on the other question about what do for data matching, I mean, the Commission is already routinely running the people that can't trace through surveillance with both HMRC, with Experian, with others, and whatever additional things that we're trying to do across government, we will be trying to do the same. So if you're not paying at the moment, then either A, we're trying to trace you, or B, we're trying to do enforcement action with you. That's where we want to be.
Austin, and then I'm going to, I think, draw it together.
Please do.
Okay, well, I'm sorry you're not going to use information on dividends. It seems to me you've made a part of income for many people, but I'm sure if it comes to MP cases, IPSA will be pleased to shower you with information on why our lifestyle is so much lower than our tax liabilities. But that's not the question. That is a reflection. I was asked to ask this question by operations management people I met from Mr. Shanahan. Now you've got to improve your operational efficiency. So let me ask, what training you provide to equip back office staff? And you said some of those will be short-term or temporary appointments with the ability to effectively manage the delivery of the operation. So what training on operations management do your back office staff have?
There's a range of training. It comes in two key parts, often delivered together. The first part is just the driving the technology of the systems. Even on our clunky systems now, there's quite a lot of training to be able to drive and put our applications through and do the normal tasks on those systems. But in addition to that, training in terms of service, how to deal with customers, how to talk with customers who often talk to us, in a distressed state, how to manage those conversations, how to try and get to the key point, how to drive a conversation forward on what's an agreed outcome, and at the end of it to try and make sure that when that caller is on the line, have we found and addressed all the issues that they've got. So there's a suite of training depending on which part of the business you're in. Some of it could be more legal orientated, some of it more service orientated, some of it more finance orientated. Depends on where you sit. So there's an overall buffer of training, systems and service, and then there can be specific bits on top. Thank you.
Okay, can I just ask some final questions on this, and then I just want to raise one other issue. Somewhere in the papers it said 20,000 of the cases could go to court now. Have you done a costing of that so that you look at the relative cost of cases being considered by the court as compared to being considered by the agency? Or, sorry, the Commission?
As I understand it, well, there's two costs here. I mean, I'm guessing you mean the cost to the court system or the cost to the individual?
The cost of the taxpayer.
Okay, so I think the answer to that is no. We've not added that into the calculation. It's okay.
Right, because there is, you know,
there would indeed
originally this thing was set up to get people out of court, if you remember. So if one of the impacts is to put more people back into court, there is a cost to the taxpayer out of that.
That would, but also, I mean, at the moment, I think it's the case that people who make an application to court pay £200. So I don't know the extent to which the court system properly...
but there's still a court...
Well, the question is whether or not the court is actually properly covering its costs, which is a question for my colleagues.
I understand, well, except for us, it's across government, right? I do understand you've got a lot to do in DWP.
I just don't know whether 200 covers the cost.
And indeed, your Business Treasury will be interested in this, I assume.
We are, and we look at the total cost of the Exchequer always, if we can.
So in the new business plan that is being submitted to you, which have you got it yet?
I'm not aware that we have.
But it's going. Can we be assured that the cost to the taxpayer, i.e. the overall cost to government, will be considered?
Very reasonable request, yes.
Okay, first thing. Second thing is, you've thought about introducing fees. Clearly, there's, you know, I accept there's a policy view on that. Did you take any? I mean, I asked this question really of the gingerbread, but we've got this behavioural insights team that absolutely fascinates me in government. Did they give you any advice as to whether or not people's behaviour would change? Did you take any advice from them?
I think the behavioural insights team has got 4 people in it, and they've been doing quite a lot of other work. I don't think they've done this particular piece of work.
What a shame. I'm trying to find out what the hell they are doing, actually, so I'd ask this quite frequently of people. I'm asking the NAO to do a little investigation.
As it happens, I know some of it. I mean, so many of the examples that they've been doing have been working with HMRC about how just simply by changing the wording on the letters that are sent out, they're getting fundamentally different answers. So if you say to somebody, actually, you haven't paid your tax, brackets, 92% of people in your postcode have, actually you get a better answer than if you just say you haven't paid your tax. I mean, it's quite a remarkable science, if you ask me. But they have.
Well, maybe you need them to help you, actually.
Well, I think we do, but then, if I may, I mean, it's not as if we haven't thought about this. So in the Green Paper, we set out quite clearly the evidence we did have from doing large-scale surveys about what people may or may not choose to do, having done some sampling on all of that. So, I mean, please don't think that the only expertise in behavioural insights sits with these 3 in the Cabinet Office.
And can I ask, if actually it turns out that the introduction of this policy were to lead to an increase in child poverty, which is another of your responsibilities as accounting officer in DWP, if that were to turn out, have you got plans in place to review to make sure that doesn't occur?
Well, I mean, you've seen how much interest the government is taking in issues to do with social justice and child poverty. The very reason why we're going down this course is actually because...
I understand why you're doing it. What I was asking is, if it doesn't turn out, if actually the evidence then comes back that this leads to an increase in child poverty, have you got plans in place to review?
I have no plans. Sorry, plans in place to review. Fine. Sorry, I have no.
But you've got no plans to replace.
I don't have a completely separate policy at my sleeve. It's hard enough to deliver the one I've got in front of me.
But okay, so no plans to replace.
Were it to be the case that actually it was manifestly not working, you would expect 2 of us who are
and
charged
if you're not getting the income in, if you don't get the 71 million that everybody else is sceptical about, except for you, and it comes in
lonely place that's up at the table,
and it's coming in the last year of the spending review. Have you got plans in place for alternative cuts?
If I don't get £71 million in, that will also mean that a lot of the volume I haven't got in, and therefore a lot of my cost base will be reduced in line with that.
But that's where the poverty comes in, possibly.
Well,
possibly.
Possibly, but I mean that actually.
That's why we need the evidence.
That would need to be looked at after the fact.
And then, can I ask you, if the people in the arrears that I'm really interested in, that you can write me a little note about, are they going to be subject to a collection charge when you're chasing those arrears?
I hope so.
No, any historic arrears will.
And if there's a non-resident, thank you for that. If there's a non-resident parent and they fall behind, which they do, at what point are you going to, or there's a change in their circle, what point are you going to trigger a charge? So you've got an arrangement, something happens that changes. At what point there are you going to trigger a charge?
Well, that'd be a discussion with a parent with care as well. So does a parent with care want to give their other partner an opportunity to continue paying?
And at what point will you trigger a charge?
When that parent with care said, I've had enough, this person hasn't paid, so long as there's been a duration of at least a week between that payment was due and it's not happening, we will then contact the non-resident parent and give that non-resident parent 14 days to either prove they did make the charge, they did make the payment, sometimes that happens, or to say, OK, no, I'm not going to make it, in which case we would then start to put in our normal collection process, which includes charges.
OK, thank you very much. Now, I just need to ask you, Mr Devereux, since we had our last hearing with you on the work programme, quite a lot's happened, and I wondered whether you as a department had had any allegations of fraud of malpractice against any of the other providers who've taken part in the work programme, apart from A&E, A3?
Not new ones that I'm aware of, no.
Have you got some current ones?
I've not brought that with me, I'm sorry.
Can you let me know? I mean, and whether I'm interested in allegations of fraud or malpractice, whether it's by the providers themselves or investigated by the providers themselves, by DWP or by the police, against all providers. And then can I ask you, since actually the hearing, I've personally had close to 100 emails, and this is just me, I haven't shared this with the committees, I don't know if other people are in the same position. I've had personally close to 100 emails, phone calls or letters, both from employees, former employees and clients of A4E. Some of them do contain serious allegations of fraud, or they contain allegations of unacceptable poor practice. And I just wondered there again whether you had received any similar correspondence, emails, phone calls or letters.
I haven't, and I've not asked whether or not they've had them in my organisation.
So, clearly I'm considering what to do with this stuff that I've received, but it's just so overwhelming. I mean, I've never had all this before, and it just sort of, I just wondered at what point you would believe that there's systematic fraud.
We have, as you probably know, agreed with A4E an independent examination of what's...
They're paying for it. They're paying for it. It's theirs. They own it.
Well, would you rather I paid for it?
I'd rather it was independent.
Well, sorry, in what sense then? I'm sorry.
What was the sense in which you meant that it was independent?
Well, it's being done by somebody that's not A4E.
But it's being paid for by them.
Who chose this person that's not A4E?
Okay, I'm going to have to write you a note on this, right? I've not got this in front of me. But we are engaging with them to get an independent assessment in the sense of getting an audit practice and that sort of thing. That's sort of independent. Anyway, the point is that is underway. Maybe you want to have a conversation with us about whether or not that particular audit might be a place for you to send that. It depends on what you wish to do with your...
You'd be willing to talk about that?
Okay, absolutely.
Okay, and then can I just ask you a final question, really, is that the criminal investigation against A3E in Hull, those investigations were proceeding in 2010, with the convictions, I think, happened in July 2011. And, of course, Emma Harrison was appointed by Number 10 in 2010. I presume the department was aware of those proceedings, and did the department tell Number 10?
Sorry, there were no... as I understand it, there were no criminal proceedings happening at the point at which Emma Harrison was appointed Number 10. They
were happening, I can let you know, because this is from DWP itself. Since DWP has investigated 9 cases. 5 were found a case to answer and have been dealt with. 1 is ongoing. We know about that. Right. 5 cases, money was paid back. And then the Hull case, it actually went to court in July 2011, but it was proceeding in 2000. The police were investigating. And that was one where somebody was found guilty and on 8 counts of forgery. So this was all preceding. The police were investigating. Everybody knew about it in 2010 when Emma Harrison was appointed. Did you tell Number 10?
The Prime Minister has already answered these questions in PMQ, so why don't I write you a letter?
The Prime Minister said he didn't. He just said, I've got that somewhere. The Prime Minister said there were no formal investigations into A3. There were, because the police were at that time preparing a case to go before court.
Forgive me, I've come prepared to answer questions. Can I write you a note on this?
Well, the other thing I want to know is, did your ministers know?
Let me write you a note on it. You're asking me a whole bunch of questions about a subject which I've not been prepared to talk about. My apologies.
I'd have thought you would know about it because it's quite important at this point in time.
You might do. It's reasonably difficult just to get the CMEC thing straight as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.